Hey guys, what's up? I hope you're doing good and welcome to my channel where I'm going to pretend I am a very big software engineer, and then in return I'll ask you to follow me and let's create things together. So in this video we are going to create a to-do application, old school to-do application, but this will show how to perform all the CRUD applications, CRUD features in FastAPI. So on the backend, we are going to use form stack. On the backend, we will have FastAPI and then MongoDB. And then on the front end, that will be a later part of this video. We will create a front end with Next.js and TypeScript. So let's just start it with creating the backend, and then on the backend, we will have all the authentication, user authentication, and all that stuff. We are going to implement JWT authentication on the backend. So without any further ado, let's just get started. So here I'm going to create two folders, one for the backend, and since later we are going to create the front end, let's just create one for the front end as well. So on my terminal, I'm just going to move to backend and then set up a virtual environment using Python. I'm using Python 3.9.9. You can use anything above 3.7, but I would recommend using 3.9 at least. So if you face any problem, you can just leave your problem in the comment and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. So Python, to create a virtual environment, just type python-m virtual env, and then it will create a virtual environment in my current directory. So after that, I'm just going to create my main application. So here the folder structure we are going to follow is pretty specific, so you can just scale this to whatever application you want. So but here I'm going to implement a production style folder structure. So first of all, we are going to have inside this backend we have another folder called app, and then inside app we have our app.py, which will be entry file for our FastAPI server. So here I'm just going to activate my virtual environment. So env/script/activate, and then for Mac and Linux operating system, I think it's source/bin/activate, and then it will activate your virtual environment. But on Windows, it's env/scripts/activate. Now we are going to install the required dependencies. So in the beginning we just need two dependencies. One is FastAPI and the other is UbiCon server. So pip install FastAPI and UbiCon. So make sure you are in your virtual environment and then install this FastAPI and UbiCon. So while this is being installed, we can just go ahead and inside our app, and then inside our main we can just do from FastAPI import FastAPI, and then app equals to FastAPI. Actually, we are going to import it from FastAPI and then FastAPI, and that's it. So here we have our app running. So let's just make a test URL, which is the home, and then define an async function. Async define hello, and then return a generic message so that we can see our API is working. So FastAPI and UVCon is installed, what we can do is just run our server using UVCon app and then app.app and then app dash reload. So the first app represent this app directory, the second one represent this app.py file, and the third one represent this app variable. So this one right here represent this app variable, and then dash reload flag will tell UVCon to reload every time any file changes. So okay, so we have our server running on port 8000. So if you go to localhost port 8000, we should just see it. So /docs, we should see Swagger UI, which is built into FastAPI. Okay, so we have why we are not seeing this endpoint here? So let's just see what's the problem. App.get, oh, I see the problem. So it's a decorator app.get. Now if I go here and then refresh, here we go. So here you see, yeah, so you see hello world message here. So now we are going to set up the folder structure for the application, and then this folder structure is very specific and you can use it to scale this application to hundreds of endpoints. So first of all, we need to create a folder will handle all of our APIs. So this folder will have all of our API, and then you might have seen like APIs have versions v1, v2. So in this we will have another folder for API v1. So this will handle our version 1 of our API, and then we can have another router for this router.py file. You know what, let's just create it later. And then here is another folder inside the app. Create another folder which is core, and then this core will have all the settings and other modules for this application. And then don't forget to create your _init files, and then inside the version 1 create _init file as well, and then inside your core create _init.py as well, and then create another folder inside this which is models, and then this models folder will contain all of our database models. So this will have all of the database models, and then schemas. So schema folder will have all the identic schemas, so we can control the flow of data and build with data as well. And then schemas, and then inside the schema we need to create init.py as well. And then the last folder that we need to create is services. So services are what actually talks to the database. We never talk to the database through our view function. So that's something that will help you to scale the application, and you can call the database from anywhere within your application. So services will have the logic to call and retrieve and update all the CRUD applications on the database. So let's just create init file in this as well. So that's our final folder structure. Now we are going to create a configuration file that will hold every environment variable and other configuration for the server. So create a config.py file in your core, and then here from identic import class setting base settings, and then here we need, so since we will be loading most of this from the environment variable, it's the best practice to store all of your credentials in your environment variable. So we are going to install the package. So the name of the package is pip install python -cu. So this package will help us load all the environment variables from the .env files. So what we can do is we can just import from the couple import config, and then first of all we need to set up the API version. So API v1 underscore string. So this is what we will append to our API. So that will be /API/v1, which will handle the version 1 of our API. Then since we are going to implement JWT authentication, we need to have a secret key for that. So this will be config, and then you need to tell JWT. So, and we need to cast it as string. So this is just basically telling the config that it's going to be a string. So for that, let's just create a .env file inside your application. So go to your app and then create a new file called .env file, and then inside that .env file you need to add this thing. So JWT secret and then JWT refresh secret and the Mongo connection string. I am currently using MongoDB on my local machine, so it's running MongoDB on my local machine, and I have MongoDB so this MongoDB compass installed, so this shows me all my application in a nice GUI interface. Now I am just loading that from the environment. So same is the case for JWT refresh. I can just load that here, JWT refresh config, and then cast as string. And then to handle JSON web tokens, we need to give it an algorithm. So here the algorithm will be this, and then access token expiration minute. So our access token will expire in 15 minutes. Token expiration. So this is this will represent our access token expiration, and then refresh token expires in 7 days. And then we need to give it the backend course and then the name of the project. So this is from typing import list and then any HTTP URL. And then for the database we need to, so this will be Mongo connection string, so we are just loading this from our environment. So if you go to .env file, you will see we have Mongo connection string. That's what we are loading here. And then we need to give it a config class. Since we are inheriting from the base settings, what we can do is case sensitive is equals to true. So that's it. settings, and then instantiate our settings class. So we are done with our configuration. So all of the required configuration is here. So now we have our configuration set up. You can just close this file, and then it's time to set up our database. So for database, we are going to use a library called Beanie to handle all the ORM stuff. So an ORM is an object relational mapper, which helps you write queries in the form of like classes and objects. So what we can do is we can just pip install Beanie, and then in the meanwhile we can just set up other thing. So here from app.core.config import settings, and then here we can just give it the name of the project, which is Todoist. So we can say title is equals to settings dot and then I think we called it, what do we call it by the way? Yeah, project name, and then open API schema. So we can also give it open API schema, which will help creating the docs and other stuff. So you can just give it the settings.api version 1, which is a string that just here API/v1, and then open API.json, and then it will create stuff for you. So to handle database connection, what we need to do is you need to import Beanie, and then from Beanie import init Beanie. So you need to import this function, and then from motor async io import async io motor. So you need to import async io motor client. Now what you can do is you can listen for the app start event. So in FastAPI, you can just listen for the app startup event by using the app.event on event decorator. So app.onEvent, and then just give it the event. So if you come here and then press, so we are looking for a startup event, and then we need to define a function. This function should be async, since we are going to initialize Beanie, and Beanie supports asynchronous functionality. So app init, and then the function. So first we'll say here that initialize crucial application services here. So for now you need to create a client. So db client is equals to async io client, and then you need to give it the MongoDB connection string, which is settings.mongo connection string. And then if your MongoDB connection string doesn't have database, so in my case I don't have any database specified here, so what you can do is you can just add the name of the database here. So in my case I'm going to call, since the name of this application is Todoist, I'm just going to call Todoist. So if this database doesn't exist on my local MongoDB instance, it will create it. So now I need to initialize Beanie, so Beanie can connect to my database and then run migrations for my models. So database equals to db client, and then the other thing we need to give it is document models. So it is a list of all the models you create using Beanie. So in a short, we will be creating some models, but for now, let's just keep it empty. So now, if you run your application, there shouldn't be any errors, hopefully. Okay, so the application startup is complete, so it means no error. So next we are going to handle all the user authentication and stuff. So now we are going to implement our user model, which we will use to store all the user informations. So here what we can do is we can create another file, which is user model.py, and then from Beanie import document. So you can just import document here and indexed. You can create a class user and then document, and then first of all we need a user ID, which is a type UUID. So it's just the UUID field, and then it's a field. So you need to import this field from Pydantic. From Pydantic import field, and then this field takes a default factory. Default factory is equals to UUID 4. So this means that it will auto assign it will call this UUID4 function, and whatever this function return, it will assign it to user ID. So we don't have to manually add the user ID when creating new user. And then our user will have username, which is a string, and then I'm going to index it. Index, and then by default it's a string, and then unique is equals to true. So every username should be unique, and then email, which should be a string as well. So email can be an email string, so this will allow Pydantic or FastAPI to check that it's a email field, it's a valid email field. So what you can do is email str. So this email str, so you need to install Pydantic email. So for that you can just type pip install email validator. So this will install email validator, and then you will be able to import email string. So now we will be checking if it's a valid email or not. And since we are going to index it, what we can do is we can just go ahead and use indexed here. So email should be indexed, and then unique, it should be unique, and then here it should be email string, and unique is equals to true. And then we are going to store hashed password, which is a string, and then first name string, last name string, and then disabled boolean. So this will just tell if the user is disabled or for some reason user is banned from using our site. Now we can have some helper method when we are going to equate two instances of the same class. It will just check for if the emails are equal, then it will be true. Other than that, it's false. And then other than that, we are going to create this helper methods property, and then define create self, and then this is going to create date time. object. So we can just import datetime and return self dot id dot generated self dot id dot generation time. So what it's going to do is just will give us the generation time, or you can just call it created at or something else. But if you call this function on this instance of this user model, it will just give us when the user was created, so the datetime field. Another helper method we can add here is define async define by email self email string. So this method will help us finding a user by the email. With self dot find self dot find one self dot email, and it's going to convert instance of user model. It should be email. And then let's just give some generic options. So the name of this collection in our database would be user. So that's all we need to do here. So just go to your app.py and then register this user model there. So user model is coming from app.models.userModel.user. So now if you rerun your server, what Bini will do is it will see there is this new user model, and then it will create the collection for this user model. So if you run the server, you click on app, I can see this new Todoist database, and then if I go to this database, I have this user collection. So again, this Todoist, and then this user collection. So this was created by Bini. So now what we are going to do is just add basic CRUD endpoints for our user, so where we can just create, read, update, delete users. So for that, what you can do is just go to this API v1 and then come here and then create a new file called route.py, and then go to this router.py file, and then from FastAPI import API router, and then router is equals to API router, and then inside your app.py you can just include that router that you just created. So from api.v1 dot router import router, app dot include router, and then router, and then you can give it a prefix which is settings dot API v1 string. So this is what you are going to do. So we are done with this file. You can just close this file from now. This is our router file, and then this is what we will be using for our endpoints. Other than that, we are going to create a folder for handlers. So these will be our route handlers. So inside here, just create our standard init and underscore .py file. So you can just use it as a module. Then user, and then in this one we are going to just create another router from FastAPI import API router user router. And then what you can do is user router dot, let's just create a test endpoint slash test, and then async define test return message. So this is just a test endpoint. Now what we need to do is just import that router here. So from app.api v1.api v1. So here I'm just registering my router and then give it a prefix. So the final endpoint for this will be API/v1/user and then slash whatever is here. So this will be our final endpoint. So here I can just run the server, which refreshed itself, and then if I come here and then refresh this page, I should see a user test endpoint. So this is just a user test and then user router working. So that's coming from here. Now what we can do is just create a route for user create. So router, so to create a user router.post /create, and then you can give it a summary as well. Summary is equals to create new user. So this will help in the documentation. You will see that it will show there. Async define so here is the first issue. So on the front end, the data will be coming, but to validate this data, we are going to use the Pydantic schemas. So inside the schemas, we are going to create user schema, another file, user schema.py, and then if you go to user schema, you need to import from Pydantic import base model. So that's the generic stuff that we are going to use, that we have been using, and then class user, and then I'm going to call it auth, and then base model. And then to create user, what we need is we need email, which is an email string, which is coming from Pydantic. So this should be, so it will validate that it's a valid email. So now we are going to, it should be a field, and then I can just left it as this operator, which means that the default is this email string. And then description, which will be sent user email. Then we need username, which is a type string. Field, and same operator. And then the min length for this should be 5, and then max length for this should be, what should be the max length? 50. You can just play around with it. And then description, which will show there on the Swagger documentation. And then we need password. So for password, it should be a string, and then min length should be 5, and then max length is equals to 24. Now we can just come here and import that schema from app. Now here comes the other problem. Now what we can do is we can just call our database here to create. So we can just say user.create, where the user is our user model, but we are not going to do it like this way. So what we are going to do is we are going to create a service to handle all of these database operations. So here, user service, and then a service is just a class that will have the basic CRUD functionality, and it will just talk to our database. So class user service, and you can just type it as static method, and then async define. So this will create our user. You can be more specific, you can just call it create user, and then it will create a user, which is user auth. Let's see if it auto imports it. No. So from app.schemas import schema.user schema import auth. Not auth model, but user auth. So we will pass the user instance as user auth, and then from app.models import user. So here is the power of object relational mappers. What we are going to do is, I'm just going to call it user in is equals to new instance of user, and then username is equals to user.username, email is equals to user dot, and you see we have all the IntelliSense from VS Code here. That's because we have defined the pydantic schema there. And then this should be coming from user model. Now it's working. And then password, we are not going to store the password in the plain format. So if we do user.password, this will store a plain password in the database, and we don't want that. So what we are going to do here is we are going to create some helper functions for security purpose. So inside our core module, I am going to just create another file called security.py. I'm going to install a couple of other libraries to handle password hashing and other things. So first of all, we need to install these two libraries for that. So let me just paste it here. So Python, JAWS, cryptography, and then passlib. So you need to install these two libraries. Meanwhile, what you can do is you can just have a function. So first of all, you need to create a context. So from passlib import crypto context. So password. So it's coming from passlib.context. So now it takes scheme, which is a string of schemes, and then you can just say we are going to use bcrypt to encrypt our passwords. And then the other option, deprecated is equals to not true but auto. So now we will use this instance to handle our password hashing. So first of all, we have a function called to verify. We have get password. So this password, it will take a password as a string and then return a string, but this string will be hashed. So return password dot underscore context dot hash, and then we are going to give it the password to hash. So it will just take this password and then hash it. Other than that, since we are here, let's just create the other function to verify the password. So define verify password, and then it will take password, which is a string, and then the hash password, which is a string, and then it's going to return a boolean if those two matches. If the password is correct, it's true. Then return password context dot verify, and then first we need to pass it the raw password, which is password, and then second is the hash password, which is hashed pass. So now we have these two functions that we'll be using to hash our password and then verify the password hash. So from app.core.security import, and then let's see what we have, get password. So instead of saving this plain password, I'm going to save the hash for that password. So now instead of saving that password, so suppose the password is 123, after hashing it will be just a gibberish. So if your database gets compromised, you don't lose any crucial data. So now inside our user service, what we can do is we can just, if this is valid, we will just say await user in dot save, and then return user in. So now this function will handle the user creation. So user schema is done. So here what we can do is from app.services dot user service import so await user service dot Oh no, it should be, I think I mistyped it here. It should be user service, not user service. And then control V here and then control V here. Your service dot create user and then pass the data as it. So since we have these constraints on user model, so we have unique constraints here. So if a user tries to create an account with the email that already exists, it will throw an error. So we need to catch that error. So what we can do is just put all of that inside a try catch block. So try this and then accept. So import. So under the hood, Beanie used PyMongo to map the queries. So from the error will be thrown by PyMongo. PyMongo dot errors dot duplicate key error. And then if that's the case, we are going to just raise an HTTP exception, and that HTTP exception should be coming from FastAPI, not, so this will coming from the FastAPI, and then this takes status code, and then in this case we can just import status from FastAPI status dot 400. We can just send bad request. So it's a bad request. And then we can even add some details. We can add details that user with this email or username already exists. So this finishes our endpoint for this. So if you rerun the server, we should see another URL pop up here, which is a post endpoint to create our user. So here you go. So if you try it out, so if you see here, right now we don't have any user. So if I refresh, we don't have any user. If I go here and then create ab@gmail.com, and then the username is abdadeel, and then the password is, let's just say password 123. Execute. Internal server error. Let's see what went wrong here. Oh, it says first name and the last name is required. But here, oh, I had to make it optional. So to get rid of this error, what we can do is, so this error is actually coming from Pydantic, so we can just get rid of this error by just importing from typing import optional. So this field is optional. So first name is optional. And then it's none. So you can just do the same for this. And then this field is boolean. Now this error should be gone. Again, we don't have anything in our database. If we go here, and then try to execute it, the response is null and the user is created successfully. So if you come here, first name, last name, and disable is null. And then if you see here, we have our email and then this gibberish password, which is hash password. Now what we can do is we can just return this. So now if let's just try to create the same this user with the same email. Yeah, user with this email already exists, so that's working. ab@ab2 and then just say email. Now this should create and return the user. Now here is the problem. So we have this hash password coming out and we don't want that. We don't want to expose our API which has even our hash password. So to get rid of this, what we can do is we can just add a response model which will filter out all the results that we want to show to outside world. So inside our schema, user schema, we can create another class user out base model. So this will show what will be coming out of this. So we need user ID, which is a UUID field. We need a username, which is a string field, and then email, and then email str first. And then we can just give it some default, and then this is optional. So this is how you declare it as an optional field. From typing import optional, and then optional here. And then I can just copy and paste from here to here, and then email is required, username, and then all of the other things are required. So now I can just use it as a response model. So inside my user, I can just specify a response model, and then I can import that model from the schema user out. Now if I go to my API endpoint and then try to create another user, this shouldn't give me this hashed password. Let's just try it out. So I need to create this 3. Now execute it. We have some error. Okay, I think disabled. I call it disabled. So I see the problem. So the problem is I need to do this instead. So just do it like this, username, and then it's this. Now you might need to refresh the database as well. So okay, I think I need just because the current ones doesn't have username field on them, so I just need what I want to do is just delete database and then restart my server so it can create the new database. So now the error should be gone. Yeah, so the application is started now. We have our endpoints working. It should be working now. So if I go ahead and try to create a new user here with baby@gmail.com, and then abdadeel as my username, execute, Okay, now it's working, but the problem is the same. We have this password, hash password coming out. Now we can just use our out model. So we can say response model is equals to user out. So now if I go ahead and create another user, I shouldn't see this hash password thing. So let's just add a new username. Okay, so it worked now. So you see the hash password thing is gone. Okay, it's working. Now let's just create the other remaining endpoints for the user. Now we can create user. The next thing is before we send the user details, we need to authenticate the user. So let's just quickly implement authentication. So for that, just come here and create a new service or a folder called auth inside your API service. So just say new folder called auth, and then inside the auth just create your standard init file, and then create JWT. Since we are going to implement JWT authentication, jwt.py. Okay, so here we need to add some endpoints. So the first endpoint is the login endpoint, which we will use to log the user in. So just create another router. Auth router is another API router, and then auth router dot host, and then we will receive username and password /login, and then we will add the response model later. Async define login function, and now we need to receive form data. So in FastAPI, you have to set up the authentication in certain ways, so your documentation also supports it. So for that, what you need to do is just receive the form data as from FastAPI.security import, I can type import auth2. So this is what you need to import, auth2 password request. Now this is what we will be receiving in our login form. So login will be auth2 password request form, which is a dependency. Depends, and it's coming from FastAPI. So you need to call it, and then from typing import any. So now you need to authenticate the user. So we can just use our user service from API.services from app.services.user-service import user service. And then we can user is equals to await user service dot. So we need to implement this authenticate method there. Authenticate and then pass in the email and the password. So email would be equals to form. So this should be form data, and then form data dot email, and then password. form data dot password. And then now we need to just implement this authenticate method. So inside our authenticate method, let's just say a static method is string define authenticate, and then this takes an email which is a string, and then a password which is a string, and then return a optional user model, and then it auto imported for me. Yeah, it's correct. So now what we need to do is first get the user from the database. So user is equals to await, and then we can just use another function which is get user by email. So add static method, I'm just creating a helper function to get the user by email. By email, and then we need to pass the email as string, and then it going to optional user. User is equals to await user dot find one, where user dot email equals email, and then we need to await this, and then we can just return user. So this service will be used here. So in our authenticate method, we can just call this service on this method. So user is equals to await user service dot get user by email, and then pass in email equals to email. Now if user doesn't exist with this email, we need to return nothing, because the user doesn't exist with this email. And then if now we need to check the password, if not, verify. So you need to import verify password that we created, this verify password. So verify password and password. So password is equals to password, and then hash password equals to, and then hash pass is equals to. So at this point we should have user. So user dot hashed password. If that is not true, return none. So we have the basic functionality here. So return user. So at this point we should have user with verified password. So we can just go ahead and return that user to our this service. And then here we can just raise an exception if the user doesn't exist. So if not user, raise HTTP exception. And then this HTTP exception should be coming from FastAPI. And then since we are here, just report status as well. And then here status code is equals to status.400 bad request dot 400 bad request, and then detail is equals to incorrect email or password. So at this point we have incorrect email or password, and if we pass this, we have the user. So we can just create the access and refresh token for the user. So let's just create an access and refresh token. So here we can just have a comment, create access and refresh tokens, and then for now let's just return from the function. So now we go, if we can just create our two functions in our security file. So define create a CC access token, and then subject whatever we want to store in our in the payload of our JSON web token. So it should be a strict string, and then here it can be any. So from typing import union. So you can import union and any from typing module, and then it will return. The second thing it takes is expires delta in so it will return an access token. So if we pass expires delta is not none, we can just create the expiration according to the preference we pass to the function. So expires delta is equals to datetime dot. So we can import datetime here. From datetime import datetime. So datetime dot UTC now plus expired delta. Otherwise, else expired delta will be expired delta is datetime dot UTC now plus the default that we configured in our configuration file. So from app dot core dot config import settings. Time. So we need to import time delta. And then we need to pass minutes. Setting start. And since we are creating access token, we are going to use access token expires minutes that we configured in our configuration file here. So inside config.py we have this set up to I think 15 minutes. Yeah, so here it's for 15 minutes. So our tokens will be valid for 15 minutes. Now to encode is our exp, which is expires delta, and subject is whatever is passed by the user, whatever is passed by the pass to this function, which is subject Now we have payload ready. We can just import JWT module from JAWS. So from JAWS import JWT. So you should have this installed. If you don't have this installed, just run pip install and then Python JAWS cryptography and then passkey. These are the two that we need in our security file. So JWT, so encoded JWT is equals to JWT dot and then we need to give it a secret to hash this. So this is JWT secret key, and then the algorithm is settings dot algorithm. So this is H256 algorithm that we are using, H256 algorithm to hash our JWTs. So now we can just do return code JWT. Now this is the function. So create access token function will be similar. The only thing we'll have the different here is the time delta. So for this we have time delta refresh token expires, and then what you need to, so the secret is different. So the secret is JWT refresh secret key that we defined here in our file. So you can just get all of these configurations from the GitHub. I'll just include a link to the GitHub repository. So create refresh token. So I think we have it ready now. So we can just go to our user endpoint and then create access token is create access token. And then create refresh token. Access token, we need to pass the user subject, that the payload we want to save, and then the payload we want to save is just user.user ID. And then the refresh token is create refresh token and user.user ID. Now we should have this endpoint working. We can just go to our docs and then refresh it. We have create new, so we need to include this route in our route.py file. So in our router, from app.api.api v1.auth import auth router. So we can just include our auth router here, and then the prefix for this will be auth, and then the tags will be auth. Now we should have our endpoint here for getting the JWTs for the user. If I don't have any error, so at this point, to use this OAuth to request form, we need to install Python multipart. So pip install Python dash multi-part. So you need to install this library to parse all of the coming in data. Okay, so we can just restart the server and then go here. If I refresh here, now I have this auth endpoint. So I know I have a user. Let's just first create a user. Try it out. User abd at gmail.com. abd, and then password is password 123. Execute, and then it should create. Oh, so the password is not, the username is abd. So here is the validation. So it says the limit value, so the password or the username should be at least 5 characters. So that's pretty cool. It's coming from the Pydantic model. So we have this created. I can just go here and then log in. Username is, and then the password is. Okay, let's see what error we have. No attribute email. Oh, so this should be username instead of email. Now this should work. Incorrect email or password. Okay, so if I try my correct email. Okay, so now it worked. So we have our access and refresh tokens coming in. That's cool. Finally, it's working. So now what we need to do is we need to have FastAPI know that we are going to have some authenticated endpoints. So for that, FastAPI has a very specific way. So first of all, what we need to do is create the dependencies. So this is the dependency coming from the FastAPI, but we will be creating our custom dependencies now. So go to your auth. I think we can just go ahead and create a dependency folder here inside the API. Let's just create another folder called dependencies, and then inside there just create your standard underneath file, and then create another file name user deps. Now here we need to import auth2 password bearer from the FastAPI. So this is what we need to import, auth2 password bearer, and then we need to give it some configuration. So reuse a equals to, and then by default let's just give it some configurations from our config module. So from app.core.config import settings. So first we need to give it a token URL. So this will be the URL that FastAPI will be calling from the front end to get the access and refresh token. So we need to create that. In fact, we have already created that here. So this should be API/v1 or whatever the base URL is, and then after that auth/login. So let's just create that here. So it's a formatted string with settings dot API v1 string and then /auth/login. So this will be the endpoint for this route handler. So FastAPI will call it from the Swagger and then get the access and refresh token, and will not have to set it manually. And then scheme is equals to JWT And then we need single dependency, async, bear with me, and define get current user. And then we need this auth2 password variable will pass the token to us, so it will be a token as string. And then we need to do the dependency injection, so it depends coming from FastAPI, and then reusable auth2 auth. So this is how you set up everything up. So from this we are going to return a user, and then user should be coming from our user model. So from app.model import models.user model import user. So this function will return user. So we need to try. So first of all, we will get the token and try to decode it, and if it's right token, we are going to just return the user from the database. So payload will be equals to JWT dot so from yours import JWT. Let's just decode it, JWT.decode, and then pass in the token. Settings dot, and then we need to pass our secret key that we used to encrypt this on JWT, and then algorithm is equals to settings dot algorithm. Now this should give us the payload if everything is good with the decode function. So we need to validate that the token data is valid. So the token data is, so we need to create a pydantic model for this. So go to our user schema and then let's just create another schema, which is auth schema. New file auth sc schema.py. Then from pydantic import base and inside the payload we will have two things. First one is access token, and this is not, by the way, for this current one. This is for what we are going to return from this function. So we have sort of security here as well. So let's just go to auth schema, and then we have access token, which is a string, and then refresh token, which is a string as well. Now let's just create another class for token payload. Sub, which will be a UUID field. So since we are using, so if you go to your endpoint, so we are using user ID for creating our access token. So user ID will be stored in our JSON web token. So if you go to user ID is a UUID field. So we need to tell in auth schema that it's a UUID field. By default it is none, and then expire is a datetime field, but we can just say in. So this is the in field. So these are the two schemas that we need. So for security, let's just add a summary here. Summary is equals to create access and refresh tokens for user, and then we can have a response model. Response model is equal to this token schema, and let's make sure it's coming from the correct thing. So this is now our endpoint will make sure that we are sending two things. One is access token, one access token, and the refresh token. So now we can use the other token payload. So token payload should have two things. One is our subject, and the other thing is expiration. So that's what we use to create. So if you go to security, here are the two things that we are expecting from the payload. So just go to token payload. So token payload should be coming from here, and then pass in this. So at this point, if anything is changed in our object that we sent with our token, this will handle it and then return a response. It will raise an exception, and we can just get that exception down. Now we need to just check if the token is expired or not. So for that, we can just use datetime. So if datetime dot, so from datetime import datetime, from datetime dot from timestamp token dot exp. It should be token data dot exp is less than datetime dot now. So this means that the token is expired. Another HTTP exception here. So from FastAPI import HTTP exception. And then status codes. So we need to give it unauthorized response. So it should be HTTP 401 unauthorized. And then details is equals to token expired, and then we will set the headers, appropriate headers like this. So token expired, and then we will just tell that we need this header. Now if the token is expired, this will throw an exception that we need to catch. So this will be JWT. So this will be the error thrown by that, and then validation error will be thrown by the pydantic. So this validation error should be coming from the pydantic. From pydantic import validation error. Oh no. So this is the error we need to catch. And then in that case, we want to raise an exception, and then could not validate user credentials because something is wrong with either with token or something is wrong with the timestamps on the token. So if the token is expired, we will also say could not validate token. So now if everything is good, we are going to just extract our user. Let's just import our user service from app.service So at this dot so if our code reaches here, we know that we have a valid user token, so we can just get the user. Okay, so since we have ID saved in our token, what we can do is just create another user endpoint, which is get the user by ID. And then this should be a UUID field. User ID equals to ID. So this will return us our user find by ID. So here we can just say get user by ID and then user.id, or in fact token data.id. So we can say token data.sub, which we know exists on this because the Pydantic validated this token. So if not user, so this means that the user with this token does not exist. We can just raise another exception. So if you could not find user, if everything is good, we can just return user. So this is our dependency, the full dependency that will get the token from the headers and then try to validate the token and then validate its timestamps. And then if everything is good enough and ready to go, it will just extract the user from the database and then return the user as payload. So this is the only user dependency we need. So now if you go back to our JWT.endpoint, we can just have another endpoint that will test our token. So this will test our dependency. So at auth router dot get, let's just make it post endpoint and then slash test token, and then summary is equals to test if the access token is valid. And then we are going to have a response model. Response model is equals to user out, and then let's just import user out from the schemas, so we don't send out the information, the crucial information about the user like hash, password and something. And then what we can do here is just define another function, async define test token, and then we will have user is equals to user. Here from the schemas, let's just import user as well. So we'll have user, and then we are sure that we'll have user because we will have this dependency get current user. What do we call it, by the way? Control P, and then inside the JWT dot, inside the user dependencies, we call it get current user. So this function is now our dependency, get current user, and then we can just auto import get current user is. So now if the code comes down to here, we know we have our user, so we can just return it. Otherwise it will just throw an exception inside this get current user function. So schema, we can this should be coming from app.models.user, not form, by the way. From app.models.user model import user. So So this is coming from the user. So now if everything goes well, we should have our docs endpoint running, and then we can just test. So you see here, we have this authorize button, and then we have this authorize this lock icon in front of this endpoint. So this means that this is a protected endpoint, and that's because of this dependency injection right here. So it says it goes to this, the OpenAPI schema created for this just goes to this, and then it says okay, so it has a dependency which is this reusable auth, and then we need the authenticated route. So this is the authenticated route. So what we can do is we can just authorize with the username, which is the email and password. Let's just create another user and make sure our endpoint is working. abd@gmail.com, and then 12, and then password is 123. Create a new user. We have a new user created, abd@gmail.com. We can just come here, abd, and then password is whatever my password is. Authorize. Okay, so we have, so far in the backend, FastAPI make a request to this endpoint and then get the refresh and access token and then saved it. So from now on, we don't need to manually add access and refresh token in our endpoint. So let's just test this endpoint if it's working. So this should return all of my user information. So here you go. So I have my user information here. So this endpoint is working. Let's just add our remaining endpoints. So another endpoint that we're going to create is for the refreshing the token. So let's just quickly create it, auth router dot, this is a post endpoint, and then /refresh, and then it refreshes the token, and then response model is the token schema. So this is a response model, and then define refresh token, and then this will have our refresh token coming in as a body, as a string in our. So we need to import body from FastAPI. So we can just do the same here pretty much. So we will try to just decode the access and refresh token, and then what we can do is we can just pretty much copy and paste what we did here. So we can just do, here you go. So the imports are, let's just import all the, so user service, I think I already have imported the user service. So let's just import these settings from API dot. and then we need to make this an async function. So now all the imports are working. What we are going to do is we are just decoding a token with our refresh token key, and then try to validate it. It's the same thing that we are doing here, but here we are using JWT secret key for our access token, and then here we are using the key for our refresh token. So that's the main difference. That's it. And then we are validating the user token. So if we go to our documentation, we should have another endpoint for refreshing the token. So if I try to log in with my username is abd, and get the access and refresh token, copy this refresh token and try to get another access token. So auth/refresh, and then let's just try it out. So I'm going to send this token and then get back 2 new tokens, which is access and refresh token with the new expiration. So we have our authentication 100% working. Okay, so we have our user endpoints working. We can just close all of these and then create our to-do endpoints. So for that, inside the handler, first of all, let's just create a handler, new file, to-do.py, and then from FastAPI import API router, to-do router is equals to API router, and then we can just use it inside our router. So from app.api.apiv2.handlers import to-do, and then inside here we can just to-do router, and then the base endpoint for this is to-do, and then the tags to-do. So I have registered my to-do router here. Let's just have a test endpoint. Return a message to-do working, and then here if I refresh, I should see to-do router here if everything goes well. No, I don't see it here. Let's see what's the problem. Oh, again the same problem. We need to make it decorator. Now if I go ahead, this result should be there, yeah, to do it. And if I try it out, I should see it working. So to do router working. So that's great. So first of all, we need to create a model for this, so we can just create and query things from the database. So go here inside the models, create to do model.py, and then what I can do is I can just go here, go to user model, and then just steal all the imports, and then class to do, and then document. So first of all, we need a to do ID, UUID, and then which is field, and then we need to give it a default factory, which is UID4, and then this should be unique as well. unique is equals to true, and then the status is boolean, and then by default it's false. So this status represents if the to do is in a done state or it's in not done state, I guess. So the title of the to do, this is an indexed field. So on with the Beanie, what you need to do is you need to have at least one indexed field on a model. Otherwise, Beanie won't create the database collection for you. And it's just the MongoDB thing. You need to have an indexed column there. So this is a string, and then created at, and then it's a date time, and then default factor is datetime.utc. Now same is the case for updated at. Now owner is, so we need to add the relationship to what owns this specific to do. So owner, so here is how you can add relationships with the Beanie. So you need to import link from the Beanie. So from Beanie import link, from Beanie import link, and then link to the user model. You need to from dot user model import user. So you can just link your user model here. So this is how you create the links, and then you can have these methods overwritten. You can have it or not. By default it will just hide from the document, but it's good to have them. You can just copy and paste it from the GitHub repo or just type it out if you feel like. Now one thing is, if we create an instance of this model, the created add and the updated add will be by default will be UTC now, but we need, when we update this, we need to update this updated add. So by default we will have the created add and updated add same, but when we update it for the first time, we need to update this field. So Beanie supports events, and you can listen for those events and then act on those events, event decorator. And then we will be using for replace, and then insert. So we can use this updated add before event decorator here, and then pass it a list of events we need to listen for. So first one is replace, and then insert. So before inserting and updating, Beanie will call this this function, whatever is under this, define updated at, and it will pass the instance that is going to be saved, and then you can just do self.updated that is equal to datetime dot UTC now. So this will reset it to the current UTC date at the time of saving this when we are updating it. So I guess that was a pretty reasonable explanation. So we are listening for a replace, which is in terms of Beanie, it's a update event. So whenever before updating anything in the database, Beanie will call this function, and then this function will manipulate the instance going to be saved in the database. So we are just updating the updated at field to the current time. Now the standard collection class, and then name is equals to to do. So this is what we are going to call it in our database, the name of the collection. is to-dos. So now we need to register this model. If you go to app.py, we need to register this model here. So from app.models.to-do model, import to-do, and then come here and then have to-do here, and then when this will restart it, it will create the to-do for us. So we should have a to-do. Oh, we should have a to-do created here. Let me just restart the server and then see if it recreates it. So let's see if it recreated. Yeah, so we have to-dos here now. So it's currently empty, but Binny created the collection for us. So we are done with this app.py file. Let's just go and create, first of all, let's just create user schemas, a to-do schema. To-do schema, and then from identity import this model. Let's just leave it for now and create our route handler. So inside the handlers to-do, let's just first create an endpoint for getting all the to-dos of the current user. App.get slash, so at slash we'll have summary, get all to-dos of the user, and then with response model. So for now we need to give it a response model. Let's go to our schema and then create our schemas there. So first of all, let's just create while we are here, let's just create all the schemas here. Class to do, create to do, create a to do. We need a title, which is a string field. From identity import field, and then by default it's the string, and then title is equals to title, max length is equals to 55, and then min length is equals to, I think 1 is enough. Then we need to have a description, which is pretty much the same thing, but for max length we will allow 755 characters, and then min length should at least be 1, and then the status. So by default the status should be optional, and then this should be Boolean, and then by default it will be false. And then we need to have another class for to do update. To do update we need title, and then it's the same thing as above, but this time they are optional. That's it. So we can just pretty much copy and paste here and then add optional here. So this is an optional field, and then this one is an optional. Why 7,555? Not, I didn't mean that. So 755 characters. And then to do all, since we don't want to spit out all the data related to do, so class to do out. So this will help us filtering what we want to show to outside world, and then send it to the response of the API. So to do ID, we want to send it, and it's a UUID field. We want status, which is a Boolean field. We want title, which is a string field. We want description, which is a sphere field. And then we want created at, which is a datetime field, and then from datetime import datetime. Yeah, it was correct. And then we want updated at. Okay, so we have all the schemas done. We can just close this one and then come to, I think we are done with the model as well. So let's just, so response model is to do out. So from the schemas import to do out. Now we can just have our endpoint, which is defined, since we are going to list all the to-dos, so define list current user is a user instance, which is coming from app.models.user model import user, and then it's coming from depends, which is coming from FastAPI, and then get current user, which is coming from FastAPI dot from app dot API dot deps dot user deps import get current user, and then this is a dependency as we are using get current user. So now this is a protected endpoint, and then we are going to return, so call user service here. So let's just create a user service here. Let's just create user service. So inside our services, let's just create to do service. So new file, to do service.py, and then if I go to this file, I can just have a class to do service, and then add static method, and define list to do's, and then this is going to create the current user, which is a user instance, and then we are going to import, let's just copy and paste the user import from to do's here. So it's a user instance, and then it's going to from models dot to do model import to do, and it's going to return a list of to do models. So let's just import from typing import list to do. Okay, so we can call to do's. Oh wait, we can just call our database here. So to do dot find. So the find method will find all the matches to do. So here you can, so here's how you can filter based upon or query based upon the relationship fields. So to do have this owner field, and then that owner field have a user ID or an ID field. So by default, if you look at the user collection, you see by default MongoDB automatically gives it an ID, so we can just query based on that ID equals to user ID, and then we need to convert it to a list from that object. So just return that to-dos. So here just import that from app.services.todo service, import todo service. So let's just call this service dot list to dos and then pass in the current user. This will get all the to-dos related to that is owned by this user. So since we are here, let's just create a to-do create endpoint, to-do router dot, it should be a post endpoint, and then slash create, and then summary is create to do, and then response model is equals to do. Now let's just give it a function, define, it should be an async function since we are going to call Benny, create to do, and then current user, data which is to do, create, we can just import that here. So this will filter out all our data and make sure that the data has title, description, and status, which is an optional field. So we need to at least have this title and description for to do, to create. So this is the data, and we also need current user. We can just copy and paste it from here. So we need to have the owner field on there. For that we need the current user, so we can add owner field. Return await to do service dot, so we need to have a create to do data and current user. So this doesn't exist now, so let's just create it. So add the static method think define create to do, and then for the first thing we are going to accept the user, which is a user instance, and then the data, which is to do create from app dot schemas dot to do schema, import to do create, and then it's going to return a to do as well. So to do is equals to do dot, and then pass all of our data and spread it, and then data dot, like I said, this is data should be the instance of Pydantic model, so we should be able to call this dict method, and then owner is equals to user. So this will take care of adding the owner field as user. Await to do dot insert, so we need to insert it. So here is insert, and then this will return this will return the coroutine, and then return to do, which will be returned by this function in the end. So we can just call this function to do create, and then this function is here. Okay, so now we should be able to at least create and create and then retrieve all the to-dos related to a user. So if we go to database, by default there should not be any to-dos, so here's nothing. Let's just go ahead and, so to create a to-do we need to be able to log in first. So for that authorize. Okay, I think I typed the wrong password, or not, gmail.com, and then try to authorize. Now I'm authorized. Close it and then try to create a to-do. If I go to to-do, create to-do, and then try it out. Let's title is clean dishes, and then description is some long description, and then by default, since we set it to false, it's false. Let's just execute it. Internal server error. Interesting. So let's see where we messed up. Okay, so I think the problem is on this create to do, the first instance should be of user instance, but I'm passing it as data. So let's just see if that solves our problem. So the data should be the second argument for this function. So let's just see if it works now. And then try to create another to do. Okay, so to do is created, and we can see to do ID, to do, and everything related to the to do. So now we just need a few more endpoints to finish the CRUD functionality of to dos, and after that we will be done our backend. So first of all, we need an endpoint to get a to do by ID. So add to do router dot get, and then to add dynamic routes, how you do it is to do ID, then add them inside these brackets, and summary, as we are doing it, summary is get a to do by to do ID, then response model is equals to do out. Async define, and then I'm just going to define a function and call it retrieve, and then we will have to do ID, which is a UUID field, and then let's just auto import it. Yeah, so we have imported that one. And then the second thing is, since this is a protected route, we need to get the current user, which is type user. I can just copy it from here. So this thing here, and then return await to service dot retrieve to do. So I'm going to add this function to do retrieve, which will take the to do ID and user ID. So current user, and then to do ID. So let's just implement this retrieve to do. So add another static method, async define, and then retrieve to do, and it will have current user, which is type user, and then data user to do ID, which is type UUID. And first we need to find the to do by ID. So for that, to do is equals to await to do dot find one, and then where to do dot to do ID equals to do ID, and then we're just going to return to do. Yeah, and as a second argument, I also want to filter the to-dos based on the current user. So the query will return, and it will make sure that it will only return the to-dos where the ID is the required ID and the current logged in user owns it, it will only return it. Otherwise it won't return the one with this to-do ID. So to-do.id, so you can just think of it as an and in SQL word. So when both of these are true, then it will return the to-do, otherwise it won't. So to-do.owner.id is equals to current user.id. And then since we are here, let's just add the remaining two functions, and the one is update to do. So async define update to do, and we will be passing current user, which is going to be type user, and then we are going to have to do ID, which we are going to update, and then the data. And then we need to import to do update from here. So for to do update, we will have title, or it should be title. So we will have title, description, and status, and all of these are optional. So let's just copy and then paste it here. And inside, first we need to retrieve that to do. So make sure that to do await to do service, and then we can just use this function to do service dot retrieve. So first of all, we will retrieve to do, and then the first argument is current user, and then the second argument is the to do ID. So this will return us the to do, and then we will just update it, await to do dot update. And then, as I said, for the update, the Beanie library used this syntax, so $, set, and then whatever you want to say, data dot dict. Since this data is an instance of base model from Pydantic, we have this dict, and then exclude is equals to exclude unset is equals to true. Await to do dot save to save the updates, and then return to do. And then the last endpoint is delete to do. So for that, we are just going to create a similar function, define delete to do. We'll have current user, and then to do ID, which is ID of course. And then again, to do is equals to await to do service dot retrieve to do, and then for the current user, you need to pass current user and to do ID. And if the to do with this with these conditions exist, we will just delete that to do. To do dot delete, and then return. And since the delete endpoint should not return any data, so that's why we are going to return none here, and then in our handlers we are going to return none as well. So now we have this retrieve to do endpoint. We should be able to now retrieve to do. So if I go here, if I go to my browser, refresh it, should be able to create and read and retrieve a to do by its ID. So let's see if there is a problem with the server. Okay, so response model, so we need to response not That was a typo there. Now the server should start. Yeah, it did. And then, so now let's just log in abd@gmail.com. Authorized. Let's just, yeah, so it authorized. Let's just see if we have any to do. Try it out. And let's see what error we have. Okay, so I see the problem. Instead of sending this, we need to send a list of these to do outs. So from typing import list. Now we just need to send a list instead of one. That's why it was giving us this weird error. So now this should return as the list. Okay, so currently I don't have any to do, so it's an empty string, empty list. So let's just try to create a to do and see if it works. Try it out, and then the title is demo to do, description for demo to do, and then the status for this is false. It's not completed yet. And then yeah, we get the response. And then now if I go to my list all to do's endpoint, execute. Interesting. So it should give us this. Let's see where the problem is. Oh, so here's the problem. So we need to compare IDs with IDs, not user ID. So instead of user.user_id, we need to say user.id. Now it should return the to-dos of the currently logged in user. Now what the error is. Okay, so the problem is the out model have this description, and we don't have description in our actual model, database model. So we need to include it here. So now it will give us error because the default one in the, let me just delete all of these and then recreate, because otherwise it will cause some problems, I believe. So now we have it. When we start the server, it should create that again. And then if I refresh, yeah, we have to-dos. Now if I go to my browser and try to execute create to-do, so let's just try to create a couple of to-dos. Execute demo to-do, create it, demo to-do 2, and then demo to-do section 2, execute. So we have two created, two to-dos created. Now try to list them. Okay, now we are getting these two to-dos. The problem was we didn't have this description there in the database model, so we were missing this description thing in our database model. So now it's working. So let's just quickly implement the other endpoints. So another endpoint should be for update. So let's just add to do router dot, it should be a put request because we are allowing partial update. You can have batch or put, any one of those two will work. And then slash, we need to give it to do ID, and then wrap them inside these brackets to make them dynamic. Summary is update to do by to do ID, and then response model is equals to do out, and then the async function for this is to do ID, which is a UUID field, and then current user data, and then this data should be to do update, and we need to import to do update from our model identic schemas. So it will have title, description, status, and all of those are optional. So user can just mark it complete and then just post one of these fields to the backend, and the backend will just handle the rest as well. So current user, it should be the instance of user model, and it is equals to depends current user. We don't need to call this function, by the way. And then return await user service dot we need to have to do service dot update, and then update to do, and then as a first argument we need to pass current user, and then the second argument, let's just hover over it. The second argument is to do ID and then the data. So let's just pass to do ID and then data. Okay, so that's it. So while we are here, let's just create the final endpoint for this, which is a delete endpoint. So to do router dot delete, and then this should be almost the same, with the only difference being we will not have response for this request. So async define delete, and then to do ID, which is a type UID, and then current user. So we need to call our service dot delete to do, and we just need to pass current user and then to do ID, and then if this is successful, just return none, which means that to do is successfully deleted. With this, we have, if we didn't make any mistake, we should be able to now have update, delete, read, list, and all. We should have basically all the CRUD endpoints for our to-dos. So let's just start with authorization. abd@gmail.com. Authorize. Okay, I'm successfully authorized. Let's just first try to create a to-do and make sure all of our endpoints are working. Try final demo description, and then it's by default is false. Successfully created final demo 2, then let's create these two. So if I go and try to, so here are all of our to-dos. So these are the ones that we just created, final demo, and then these are from the previous requests. Okay, let's just try to retrieve this one that we just created, the last one. So get to do by ID and then paste it here. Okay, so it gives us all the information about this to do. Let's just try to update the current to do and make it true by default. So we don't need title and description. We just want to make status to true. Execute it. We can have, let's just try to update this for now. Title is and then try to mark it as complete, execute. Okay, so we have this marked as done. So if we try to get all of these again, we should have one of those marked as true, which is done. So here's the one. So it's the status for this is true. So our update is working. So let's just try to delete the one we just updated. So if I refresh here, I should have 4 to-dos, and if this request is successful, I should have 3 to-dos left. Okay, so all of our CRUD application along with JWT authentication is working. So let me know what you think about it, and in the next part we will be creating a front end, a cool front Next.js TypeScript front end for this. So stay tuned for that. Thank you very much for following along, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.